Hi, everyone. I'm Barbara Cohen from NASA Goddard. I am the Artemis Program Sample Integrity Lead, and I also have slides here from Ryan Ziegler, who is the acting Artemis curator. You heard Sarah say we hopefully will have someone on board for that pretty soon. So Sample Integrity Lead is looking at the end-to-end lifetime of samples from thinking about them to getting them back into the lab where the curators and the PE team take over. But sampling is not the only thing that we're doing, obviously, on the surface of the moon, and you've heard a lot about what we're doing. Sampling is part of our field geology campaign. And it feeds into real-time information and real-time knowledge about what we're doing on the surface, as well as the 50 plus years of sample science that we do afterwards. So understanding the real-time implications of what we're doing on the surface, being able to say, was this a volcano or an impact crater, is super useful. Trying to understand how to better explore the site, trying to understand what the instruments are looking at, how to interpret instrument data. All those are part of what samples do for us. So a thoughtfully planned, skillfully collected, carefully returned, and meticulously curated set of samples from each Artemis mission is what we're here for. And these are some SDT science words that you can go read from the Artemis 3 Science Definition Team report. But this also traces back to all of our community documents. We all want samples. Everyone wants samples. Samples inform all of our investigations. So even if you're not the person in the lab with the samples, your results are crucial to understanding how planets form and evolve. All those geophysics instruments, all the remote sensing instruments, sample knowledge feeds into all of those. So we all want samples. So I'm just going to go through each of those adverbial phrases that I put up there. This is what sample integrity is. Thoughtfully planned means that sample collection is part of a well-orchestrated field campaign. And that means that when we are planning for our field campaign to understand the geology of that field site, we plan in our sampling as part of that. We have specific questions that we're asking and trying to understand the field site. Samples are designed to address those science questions. We're not running out and just picking up whatever and hoping for the best. One of the things that's different on Artemis than it was on Apollo is that we are highly constrained on our returned mass. So that is part of the Orion architecture. We are working very hard to change that for future missions. But in the near term, we're very, very constrained on mass. So we will be really thoughtful about the samples that we're trying to collect, how much mass they are, how to estimate those masses, and how to plan them into our field campaign so that we don't have to go back through them at the end and ditch samples and decide which ones to collect. High grading is a really, really bad use of crew time on the surface. What you want to do is collect the right mass the first time and bring everything back that's very thoughtful and focused on what you're trying to accomplish at the site. That mass is tied up with how you bring the samples back, how you contain them, and how they fit back into Orion. That's evolving all the time. We are trying our best to keep our finger on that pulse and to be in that conversation. And you've heard that a million times today, trying to be in the conversation, trying to guide that, trying to understand as those container masses and configurations and the way they are put together evolve, how we understand that. And that's going to guide how much mass we're able to collect on the surface. So that is not at all finalized. I'm not going to say it is for a little while, but as our additional team members come on, we are working hard at that. And so that's an integral part of our geology EVA planning. Skillfully collected means everything that you just heard Cindy and Kelsey and Trevor talk about, how people are doing the work on the surface. You heard Jake say that the astronauts are our friends. They're more than that. They're part of the science team. They're our science team members. They're the science team members who are on the surface making real-time decisions. It's really important for them to not only understand the field geology in the moon, but understand how the samples play into the field geology itself, right? It's not just pick up any old rock, it's pick up the rocks that answer our science questions. You need to know the science questions, you need to know how rocks work and how you're going to pick those up, and actually physically how to pick them up, not just pick them up with a glove and lick it, it, right, and put it in a bag, but the physical processes of picking them up. So skillfully collected is really important. This is not something I'm super worried about, but it is something that we are absolutely participating in, defining how to do these activities, making sure everyone gets trained so that it's second nature. And sometimes it's a balance, right, between collecting something that's as pristine as we can get it to be versus this is the best I can do, and is it going to be good enough? Right now, that's kind of a conversation in some of the jet tests. That's maybe a conversation with the Earth. We want that to be something that doesn't have to come back to Earth necessarily, that the crew can make their own decisions as fully empowered members of the science team and fully knowledgeable about what's a representative sample, what's not a representative sample, what's something that I picked up to look at and put down, but I didn't find it again. Should I bring that one back, right? So they have to be fully empowered to be able to do that. They have to be able to estimate mass on the fly using only volume available to them. We don't have a scale. We're not going to be able to weigh everything that comes back, but we are going to have to fit in a mass allocation. That's a skill that we all need to be able to learn, and all these off-nominal procedures and documentation. This, again, I'm not super worried about. This is something that we all understand happened on Apollo, but we're all learning again as part of our flight procedures. This is a lot different from our ISS style, where we had very well-written procedures that are just do this, then do this, then do this. When you're out in the field, it may not look like what you thought it was. So your field notes and your field documentation are extremely important. They're crucial for interpreting the samples. So we're making sure to get those developed and deployed for the crew. And during Artemis 3 testing, we started this, and we'll be continuing during the Jet 3 and the Jet 5 testing. And then carefully returned means through the whole phase of from the surface to the Earth. These are all the places where tools and samples are going to see all of these things. This is a little bit dated. I'm working to update this, but it just gives you kind of a overview of all the different groups that are going to be touching or handling or dealing with the samples. And so these are all the places where we need to look at how they're doing that. How are things packed? What's the temperature like? Are they exposed to people breathing on them? All those things have to do with how we're getting the samples back in ways that we understand. Even if they're not completely pristine, documenting what happened to them is the most crucial point. And Andy in the next talk is going to be talking about specific chemical contamination, but all of these other things go into the sample integrity and understanding their history and how we use them for science. The curation part, as Sarah said, we're getting a new Artemis curator. Ryan really wanted me to make the point here that sample curation, planning, and implementation go hand in hand. You've heard the curation office say this a million times. Curation starts with your mission idea. So they are integral to this process, the Artemis curation lead. The Artemis curation lead is looking at the planning for the samples. When the samples actually come back to the ground, they will be opened in the Apollo lab, and the lunar sample curator is then responsible for doing the preliminary examination, curation, and allocation. So there are two people really working with us, the curation lead who's doing the planning, the contamination knowledge and contamination control collection, the lab planning, all of that stuff. But then when they come back, the lunar sample curator will be integral to that. And I just want to say too that we are aware, we are acutely aware that the capabilities that we have for Artemis 3 and probably Artemis 4 are not what we want for the community in terms of overall everything about samples, everything, sample mass, sample temperature, mobility to get to different geologic terrains, right? All of that is what we're calling the sustaining phase, and sample integrity is right in there trying to say, hey, if you're going to be able to make these evolving capabilities, here's what we want. Can you work towards these? Can you work towards these? Sample cold conditioning is one of our biggest bugaboos right now. It's extremely difficult to do, but it's extraordinarily important. Jake told you that he and Noah wrote a white paper about why the South Pole. Why the South Pole? Because there are PSRs there with volatiles in them from ancient cometary impacts. I think you must know my interests are in the ancient impact history of the moon. That's where it is. That's where it resides. When we can go get that material and bring it back and study it, that is what we're going to learn, all the ancient history about what's happening in our solar system and the dynamics of the solar system. It's extremely hard to do. It's going to take a lot of clever engineering and some money. And so we are working towards that as one of the things that we want to be able to do and to bring in parts of that as we can into earlier missions. And you heard Sarah say too, that we're going to be asking the community for a lot of input into things that we want for cold curation, for conditioned sample return and curation. So hopefully a lot of you in this audience are going to be involved in that as we go.